All right, welcome back to the RunThrough Trails podcast for another episode. This week we're joined by special guest Alex Staniforth. Welcome, Alex.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for your time. So I just want to do a quick intro for Alex before we get into some of his stories, because Alex is, he's doing a lot of different things. Most recently, a specific project, the 446, which we're going to talk about a lot. But just a little bit of insight for those of you who might not have heard of Alex. So Alex is an inspirational speaker, adventurer, and founder of Mind Over Mountains. He's overcome a load of personal challenges, which we're going to kind of touch on today. And has had a few kind of sketchy experiences on Everest, which are quite well documented. But he's also an ultra endurance athlete, really passionate trail runner, and also an author as well. Another thing that Alex is doing is fundraising campaigns, raising a lot of money for charity towards mental health and well-being through being out in nature and doing things that he loves. Part of that folds into a project called Project 500, but there's a specific thing that Alex has most recently been working on that we're going to kind of delve into today. So hopefully I've done that justice, Alex. Thanks again for being here. What we always start out with on these guest episodes is just a little bit of background about you as a person, like a bit about your childhood and a bit about how you found yourself in this position today. Like, how did you get into running and adventuring, and where did you grow up, and a bit of context for the listeners.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, James. Where to start? It's always an interesting question. I think it's probably important to set the scene that I had a very kind of normal start in life. I wasn't like a runner from, childhood. Quite the opposite, really. And at the same time, I was really fortunate. I was brought up in Chester. I was an only child, and my parents gave me everything I needed. I had a really nice and pleasant start, and it was all fairly normal, really, until I was about 9 years old. Um, and I had a seizure. So I woke up under a table in a biology class at a primary school, and that was diagnosed as epilepsy, which fortunately was quite a mild form, and it was brought under control by medication. But the epilepsy really was a whole kind of, I guess it was a catalyst for a whole host of different challenges like anxiety and panic attacks. And because kids are very kind and considerate, I was like bullied from the time I started school pretty much until the day I left. I hated sport at school. I know it's a cliche, but I was the kid that came like second to last in cross country in year 7. I was hopeless at anything related to exercise or fitness. Um, and I've also had a stammer ever since I've been able to speak, which comes and goes when it likes, and can be so bad that I've smashed up phones at home, like just been so frustrated that I can't say my own name. That makes everyday interactions, it made school even harder than it already is for young people. And it's something I still battle with now today, despite somehow being a speaker and speaking on stages in front of hundreds of people. I still struggle with buying a bus ticket or making a phone call, and the list goes on. Um, so I guess I described my childhood as quite unsettling, quite challenging. And I know it could have been a lot worse. And you hear those stories all the time, but you only know what you know at the time. And I guess I found myself very anxious and no confidence, no self-esteem going through childhood. And I guess that all changed for me when I was a teenager and I found the outdoors. Um, Before I talk about that, in terms of running, my dad was a marathoner, so he'd ran in London a few times. He was really, really keen on it. He ran for a club. So from an early age, I kind of saw him being really active and, and he ran everywhere. Um, I think I was kind of disappointed in maybe that I didn't really follow the same lead, and when we were on holiday in France, I remember my stepmom made a €2 bet, which that was a lot of money back then, um, that I couldn't run for a mile with my dad. Now, I've always had that competitive spirit, and I think being bullied has always made me very competitive and really wanting to prove people wrong. So I pushed, I wheezed, I complained, I dragged myself around for that 1 mile in France, but I did it, and I got my €2. I bought my pan of chocolat, and that was my first ever and probably first only ever prize money as an athlete. Um, but what that did for me was that whole shift of what was possible, and I started to look for the next challenge and how could I keep on pushing myself. And I was always interested in nature and being outside, but just, being in the forest near our house or, being by the coast, but not kind of pushing myself like we do now. Um, and then I went on my first hill walk when I was about 14 in the lakes with my friend Tom. And that was when the light bulb moment hit me, and that was when everything changed because I kind of realized that, we can't always choose our challenges in life, but we can choose our response to them. And from then on, I kind of realized I wanted to, prove the bullies wrong, prove myself wrong, and keep on pushing the bar. And asked myself this question about Everest and didn't know where it was. But that was when the obsession and the fascination came. And at 14, I decided, as you do, that one day I was going to try and actually climb Everest. And that was where this whole outdoor thing began. And I finally had that confidence and that sense of belonging that I'd never had at school.
Yeah, so
So
this is perfect. Like, this is so cool to hear because obviously Run Through is an event company, and we talk quite a lot about why we do what we do and our purpose and the positive impact we can have on the world. And some days you feel like, well, we're just putting on a running event, or we're just putting on a trail race, or whatever it happens to be. And really, that's all there is to it. But when you actually step back and look at it, I try and kind of remind the team and the staff quite a lot, and I think about this on a daily basis, the impact that these sports and events and whatever it might be, even just time outdoors. It doesn't have to be running, but like some going on some sort of adventure provides people with an opportunity to take back some semblance of control. And I think for me, when I think about anxiety and think of people that I know that struggle with it, I mean, I think every human struggles with it to some degree, but definitely to a lesser extent than you've had to. Um, to me, I always think of a lack of control,
mhm.
and that feeling of not being in control of a situation. And if you can go out into the outdoors or take on a challenge or give yourself a goal that you can then achieve, maybe that's some way of kind of creating something that you can control in life. Did you ever kind of think about it in that way?
I think as you say that, that sounds exactly right. And I think that's why these events are so important because literally like one experience can be life changing. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but
Yeah,
for
it
me,
does.
just
But yeah,
one simple hill walk was just a whole mindset shift. And when you change your mindset, you change your environment, you can change everything. Um, and when I got into running, like I think I remember I started to like, you have to run a little bit around our hometown, in the forest, and then I saw a 10K race advertised. It wasn't a run through event, I'll be honest. It was a local trail race in Beeston, but that that allowed me to kind of set a goal. And as you say, I think setting goals for ourselves allows us to take control. It gives us some kind of certainty over a situation which might feel completely outside of our control. And I think that's why in the pandemic everyone was out walking and exercising because it was one thing we
absolutely.
could do. And also I think that when so as I got more seriously into it, I did have Everest as the big goal, but in the meantime, my short term focus and passion was just running, and I went from a 10K to then a half marathon to a full marathon. I ran for a club, and then when I got injured, suddenly having that thing pulled away from me, that loss of control, was the trigger for depression. And I remember when I got back to it, having the running, having the goals gave me something to kind of fight for, and I think we need that purpose in life. So,
Yeah,
we see them as just a race, but I think back now and how important those goals were because they keep proving what's possible.
they really do. It's difficult because it sometimes trying to find kind of meaning in life can be quite challenging because you can look at things in a lot of different ways. And if we're honest, like sometimes things can feel a little bit kind of nebulous, maybe a little bit pointless. Like it's difficult to define a true purpose, but by creating almost like an artificial goal and deciding, well, regardless of whether this really matters in the grand scheme of things in the universe, this thing matters to me. So I'm going to decide it matters. I'm going to work hard towards it. And through that process, I'm going to learn and grow. And then whether I achieve it or not, it doesn't matter because it's set this thing for me to work towards, which is going to give me confidence, is going to allow me to test myself, it's going to allow me to kind of prove to myself that I can be disciplined and achieve things that I thought were difficult. And I guess you kind of started out with something fairly a fairly big goal, probably one of the biggest goals. I've got to just quickly touch on though before we talk about the Everest stuff. I'm from Nantwich, so I'm not far from you at all. Which club did you run for, and what was this race in Beeston? Because I used to go to Beeston like every weekend as a
Oh wow! And again, this is it because like in running, it always ends up feeling like a really small world anywhere in the
it
world. And
is, yeah.
it's brilliant. So my first club was actually West. It was actually West Cheshire club.
Yeah.
So AC. So I trained with them at Ellesmere Port for quite a while, and I've always found being in clubs really difficult, and I'm not, now that I've been in Kendal now for over 6 years. So obviously, I left my club because of that, but also I've never joined a club up here because with my speech, I just really struggle with the kind of social element side of it, and so I just run to escape all that. But it was a massive step forward in running and training because suddenly I was running with people who are better and faster, and they pull you along, and you learn from them. There's races, there's the Borders League. I was at high school in Tarpley, so not too
No
far from
way.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
I did a
Ten
talk
minutes
about
up the
pallet
road.
books. Oh, blimey! I did one. I did a talk actually at Nantwich Bookshop. So there you go. Um, but I think that club was that sense of community, and while I was depressed, that sense of community is a really key part of our mental health and well-being as well, and I think that, maybe when we are going through, kind of change or challenges in life, running is that element, as you say, of creating something that we can control, and you can see why people end up doing a 5K and then going on to doing 100 milers because they kind of keep wanting to raise the bar, and I think that is great, but it also has some negative challenges as well aware of that you're not always trying to escape things and trying to, set the kind of. I think if we always need to have another goal to feel happy, we're never quite going to be there. So we need to enjoy the journey as well. But that's a deeper issue maybe to come back to.
Well, I mean, it is, and it's really hard to have these conversations and not just spew cliches. But again, like we always say, they're cliches for a reason because enough people have experienced them and said them that they become cliched. But it is just true. Like this whole process driven mindset, enjoying the journey, all that stuff. It isn't like an eye rolling cliche. It's pure reality because we are going to get injured. We are going to fail to achieve goals. And if all we're ever doing is striving to achieve something in the future that we never quite reach, and when we reach it, we set something new, like we're never really going to feel kind of at peace or content. We're never going to be able to achieve that.
No,
Um,
and I think it's true, and as well, like I think more recently I've started to just realize that actually why am I doing this? And I think for me running has always been a way to compete. And initially as a teenager, the outdoors was always a way of kind of proving myself to be good enough, which sounds quite in depth, but I think when you've been bullied, inevitably you're going to need that kind of validation. And running is very measurable. You can measure your progress through your times, through your results. And when I race now, I always want to be in the top kind of 5%. I go out with that kind of mindset. Two things, and I think obviously nowadays running is getting so popular that I tend to enter smaller events because then I've got a chance of being in the 5%. Um,
yeah.
but I think in that early 10K was just a beast and trail run, so it was a 10K race on trail, and I loved it. But back then, because it was my first race, I didn't know what a good time was. I just getting round was my achievement, and then I entered a half marathon, which is your natural step. But then I actually got disqualified because I was underage. So whilst my friends were being like, obviously bar for obviously pubs for being underage, I was being, kicked out of half marathons, which I wouldn't endorse. But it. I think it's just a measurable way of making progress, and I think coming into the lakes, being in fell running, suddenly it's not so much about sort of times and fitness anymore. It's the terrain and lots of other factors. So yeah, I think it is important though to not always to expect sort of progress to be in it's not kind of a continual line because that's just going to set us up for disappointment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it seems like, I mean, your first race was a trail run. Your kind of first dream aspirational goal was to summit Everest. So like not exactly the same thing, but some continuation there with like being outdoors, being on the trails, being in the mountains, whatever that might be. Um, what do you think that is? Is that like a bit of a sense of awe? Do you find yourself, are you one of those people who's out on the trail and you just love being out there all day, being in that environment? Or is it that it is a bit more solitary and you're not so much running in like a big pack of people at a track race or on the road? Like, or is it a bit of a mixture of all those things that attracts you to like trails and mountains over just pure road running?
I think it's a mixture of things, and I do enjoy being in a race, and I do enjoy, trying to chase people and being chased and pushing myself. But I started in road just because I lived, in Cheshire. There's not a lot of mountains there, and because it's what my dad had always done, and my dad was, he's my inspiration, and he came to all my events and races, and so naturally wanted to beat all his times, and fortunately I did. But I think, that was all I had access to at the time. And, there's that back then, I mean, I'm only talking sort of, you know, 10, 10, probably 15 years ago. Like, trail racing was probably less of a thing back then, maybe. In my club, mostly, it was a road and track club. So naturally it's geared towards that. Um, I was always a hill walker. So I guess I had, you obviously running, but then I had all the mountaineering side, which was obviously hill walking and climbing. And I always saw them as two different things. Running was almost kind of training for that, really, but also I had my own independent goals around timings and things. Um, but then I think naturally, like, I did my first set of marathons on road, at Manchester, then Chester, then London 2019. And I just kind of realized that I was getting bored of the kind of process of constantly chasing times, because you kind of reach a point when you kind of hit a wall and it's really hard to break through that. But also it just felt a bit arbitrary to just keep changing, constantly chasing numbers, but also injuries. Just running on road kept injuring me. Um, and at some point, I like the idea of combining hill walking and running. By hill running, because I found hill walking started to get quite boring because I wanted to kind of move faster. And
That's
running
exactly how it
was,
feels, isn't it? I used to
yeah,
do a lot of like mountaineering and hiking, and then as soon as I was fit enough to run, I'd be hiking with a big pack and boots on, just thinking like, I should be
yeah,
running up this with shoes and a little running vest. Like this is crazy.
exactly that. And I do still hill walk occasionally, but I wouldn't choose to do that on my own, on a weekend, because suddenly when you have the freedom and the simplicity of fell running, um, it just became a massive bug. And I guess I moved in the Lake District partly to actually do more of that, because I realized that was my happy place. And, I still, like even now, when I train on roads, probably half my miles are on road.
Yeah.
But when I switch onto trail, suddenly there's a lot, I'm not injured as much. And there is that awe of the environment. And when I go back home now and run, I just get a bit bored. And I started to wonder, like, how on earth did I used to, train probably 50, 60 miles a week on road? Because now I know I'm really spoiled, in the Lake District. But I think it's partially for an injury perspective, but also just I love being out in that environment. I love being on a hill and watching the sunrise. Or it's like this morning, I had hill reps at the end. I jumped in a tarn for a dip. And um, I don't always enjoy it when it's wet and when it's windy. I hate it, and it's more a case of doing it because I have to. And I know that for me, it's a way of life. Like, it's maintenance. It's a medication that I have to take to just to stay in a good place mentally. I don't always enjoy the silence. I'm often running. I've got music on because I don't really want to think too much. But the best way to describe running on the trail for me is just a way of life now. And I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have access to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely understand it, and everything that you're saying, I'm sure is resonating with a lot of people. Um, yeah, it's yeah, it kind of leads really nicely into um, Mind Over Mountains and that whole project and sort of the impetus behind that, because you've just said that there that being outdoors, exercising, training, whether it is roads, mountains, Everest, or a 10K trail race around Beeston, it's medication. It's something that you need to feel centered, to feel happy, to feel like you have some semblance of control. So was the idea behind Mind Over Mountains to kind of share what you'd learned and try and kind of, yeah, resonate with other people who might be feeling the same way?
Yeah, I think so. And when I reflect back to finding hill walking at 14, and then ever since then, being on the bike or walking or running became part of my every my everyday day. Actually, I think life and identity. I realized just how powerful that was. And I've still had, various bouts of anxiety and depression, and bulimia for like 8 years. So the outdoors wasn't a cure, but it was just a way of managing that. And I think again, it comes back to the endorphins, that sense of control, sense of perspective, sense of achievement that you get from doing these things. And so the real kind of light bulb moment as such came in 2017 when I climbed on the highest point of all the 100 counties in the UK. So that was like a 72-day challenge of running, cycling, walking, and kayaking. England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, all human powered. And what struck me is actually it took me longer to get the help I needed as a mental, like as a young man who having like mental health issues than it did to cycle, walk, and run 5,000 miles around the country. I mean, we all know that's not that clearly is a problem. And I guess I realized that I've always felt fortunate that I've always had access to the outdoors, and I guess I've got awareness of that, and it's still a big part of my life. And the biggest challenges are when I'm injured or I can't run for any reason, because you notice how important it is when it's taken away from you. Um, and then again, another kind of weird thing that happened, and again, I always think, I think I have a saying just to like, I trust the process because things happen when we need them to, and there's an opportunity in every setback, in every injury is an opportunity, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And I got an email from a group who wanted to do an event around the outdoors and mental health. So naturally, like I threw myself at that because I wanted other people to experience what it had done for me. Not as a cure, not as a magical pill, but through all the support I have had, all the therapy and antidepressants I've had, they've always been kind of I guess, a plaster on the problem. And for me, being active, I think is something that everybody should be doing. And I think in our modern world, we've lost the way a little bit with that. Um, it might not be by running; people have to find their own way of expressing themselves. But um, I just wanted everyone to experience that. So the charity was never really a plan, but I felt it was the right thing to do. And we're now 5 years old as a charity, and it's grown much bigger than me. But it all started with that vision of giving people that safe space to walk and talk in the mountains and to find for themselves.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, makes all the sense in the world. It's actually, I have to draw a quick parallel between, so my usual co-host Lewis, who's actually also my coach. Um, obviously the listeners will be very aware of Lewis's wife Gemma, who has also been on the podcast. She's actually now a professional sponsored hoccer athlete. She has a crazy story of being diagnosed with very serious cancer in her 20s and having this huge impact on her life, and obviously different experience to you. But what she took from that through that process of treatment and recovery and dealing with that illness was that being active and moving and using activity and being in the outdoors as a tool to help you get through something incredibly difficult, something that's almost like unsolvable, something that feels like it could never really be fixed. Um, and that she was getting a lot of feedback from certain medical practitioners and stuff to not do that, to be cautious, to be careful, to stay at home, to protect yourself. But what she found is actually by moving and running and being in the outdoors, sharing experiences with people, that was the best thing that she could possibly do for her mental well-being, but also just for her health. So she started a charity called the Move Charity with the exact same idea that you've got here, behind, look, this is something that can have a huge positive impact on you, no matter how serious this illness, be that physical or mental, might be. By being active and moving, something that we're meant to do, something that we're kind of built to do, um, you can really have a huge impact on how you feel. So yeah, I just thought it was an interesting parallel.
And that's a great story. And I've heard other things quite recently from people who've had very severe issues. There was one guy, Marcos, who had a stage 4 cancer, cancer actually, a diagnosis, and again, his doctors basically told him the same thing. They told him to follow a conventional approach, and he was running, topless in the cold, in the snow. He was doing ice baths. He was doing everything kind of against the grain, because I agree that I think movement is medicine. It's what we're designed to do, and he fully beat it. He proved a lot of surgeons wrong, and they were very surprised that he was able, actually reverse his cancer. Of course, like I'm not an expert on that, but I would fully agree that that approach is, if I ever found myself in that position, is one I would do. And I think if we're moving forwards. I mean, a simple experiment: if you're having a bad day and you're stressed, if you go outside and move for half an hour, you're probably going to come back feeling better than you were before. Um, there is a caveat to that. Sometimes the pressure and doing big 100-mile events and doing a marathon, there is a come down from that. And at the moment, I finished my challenge 4 weeks ago. I'll be honest, mentally, it's really hard. But let's face it, doing ultras, we don't need to run that far for our health. We're actually meant to do a lot less, but we don't just do that for our health. I think we do that for lots of other reasons and personal goals as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you were talking about it earlier, I was thinking classic post-marathon blues, and that one goal comes to a conclusion, be that positive, or maybe you've achieved it or maybe you haven't, but that down period immediately after the race, every single person listening to this podcast will know what that feels like. And that's when you're immediately back on the internet looking for another race to do, which is that kind of goal chasing, to have something to aim for. Um, So it is difficult and it's somewhat contradictory because we're also saying, well, enjoy the process and the rest and recovery after a big challenge should be part of that process. And so finding a way to enjoy that is useful. But I think it ties back into what you said about being injured as well, Alex, is like it's all an opportunity. So maybe this is an opportunity to do some other things that you have to sacrifice when you are so heavily in the middle of a training block or when you're out for 72 days straight trying to summit every peak in it in all the 100 counties in the UK. But let's use this as a segue to move into talking a bit more about the project that you've just finished, because this was one of the fundraising initiatives for the Mind Over Mountains charity that we were just chatting about. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what you've just done?
Yeah, so the 446 was probably the biggest challenge I've ever done. And basically, the concept was actually climbing all 446 mountains in England and Wales. So that's anything over 2,000 foot with 15 meters of prominence. So the correct classification is a nuttall. So there's 257 in England and 190, sorry, 100, 256 in England, 190 in Wales. Um, so I ran and cycled in between them. So entirely human powered, about 3,000 kilometers, about 11 and a half times Everest of height gain in 45 days. So the previous record was 6 months. So we've
Wow,
quite a bit off that, which I'm really
just a
pleased
bit.
about. But
Yeah.
the thing is, no one had really done it like in that human powered approach before. And um, I guess, I guess a short story. So I lost my license last July because I had a seizure during my coast to coast run attempt. So I couldn't drive anyway. So I thought, well, how do I get in between the mountains? So I thought, well, I bought a bike as you do. I sold my car, and so I wanted to kind of see how fast it could be done in like one continuous loop. Um, so yeah, I started on the 16th of May down in Dartmoor. So I went up through Dartmoor, then through Bristol, through South Wales, all the way through all the peaks in Wales into the Peak District, then the Yorkshire Dales, the Pennines, Northumberland, and I finished in the Lake District, where there was
Wow.
170 mountains, I think. Um, so yeah, so the 446 as a challenge was um, definitely the biggest thing I'd done in terms of the physicality of it as a runner, and I genuinely didn't know how I was going to get through it without hurting myself or rolling an ankle, which I'm always doing, but. It raised £36,000 for our charity, which, to be honest, has missed our target by quite a bit. But very, very grateful for the support that I did get. And there was two reasons for doing that. It was my 30th birthday in June, and I wanted to mark that by doing something ridiculous. So on my birthday itself, I was actually running in the Cheviot, which is exactly where I plan to be. I really don't enjoy birthdays, so for me, there's no place else to be but be in the mountains, running a have some cake. Um, and also because it was 10 years, 10 years in April since the avalanche on Everest. So I was there in 2015 when the earthquake hit Nepal, and
Yeah.
we were trapped just below Camp One when that hit. And we sadly lost three of our Sherpas down at base camp, and there was 22 people killed at base camp, and 9,000 people across Nepal as a whole. So we were a tiny part in that disaster. Um, but obviously that was a life changing experience at 19 years old to experience that, for the second time. Um, and that near death experience really teaches you a lot about life and what's important and the need to, really discover our full potential and what we're capable of. And that really is what's motivated me ever since. So there's two big milestones really, and this challenge ticked the boxes. So I finished on the 29th of June, so almost a month ago. It hasn't really sunk in yet.
I'm not surprised. I mean, yeah, I got to know more about what this looked like. I mean, first of all, how did you even come across it? How do you find these things? Like, are you're obviously quite into this world of taking on big endurance based challenges. It seems to be with a bit of a UK focus. Obviously, now you've moved up to the lakes, kind of like the home of fell running. Well, it's not the kind of, it is the birthplace of fell running. A huge kind of culture around exploring the mountains. There's things like the Bob Graham Round, which are way more mainstream than some of these other challenges, and probably fairly now well known. But
Mhm.
how did you come across something like this? Are you reading books? Are you looking at different websites? Are you just looking for something that falls within a certain time period, or yeah, what was the inspiration behind this specific goal?
I think ever since Everest, I kind of just I kind of made a conscious choice really that I wanted to try and make a bigger difference, but closer to home by doing ultra endurance challenges over here. And I think I'm always interested in like the kind of human powered element in ultra running because I'm not really built for anything else. I'm okay on the bike, but I don't really kind of train or compete on the bike. So that I guess I came up with a bit of a criteria, and then I've not done anything really big since 2020. And I have, ticked off, as you say, some of the more kind of mainstream things like the Bob Graham and the Frog Graham, the Lakes Mears Waters, a few big events and races. Um, but I'm more motivated and more inspired by doing things that are different. Trying to chase records or trying to do things in a different way. I don't really enter like a lot of events or races. Um, just to say, I did run through Tatton Park a few times. That was a cracking race. Uh,
No, of course it was.
yeah, that was back in the days of, when I was training for a road marathon. So, I got fairly quick on that. Um, but I think as time's gone on, I've been less interested in races because for me, the outdoors is very much a case of self-expression. It's about me versus the environment and myself. And I use races as I guess as kind of a fitness mark, but I want to do stuff that hasn't been done before. Um, and I guess life gets in the way for me as much as anyone else. And after a while, I find this kind of itch, and I'll I'll kind of know that I need like a big project. I need like a big Everest style project. Um, and I'll come up with kind of a criteria. So I might like write down a few things, okay, ideally it needs to be XYZ, in this time frame, etc. What would success actually look like? Um, and when I've got a clear idea of that, it's often a case of waiting until I get that kind of goosebump feeling of commitment. Like on Everest, even now, I remember at 14 looking at that picture of Everest and that goosebump feeling of that's where I want to be. So I need to wait till I get that same feeling for something,
Yeah.
and then I just know intuitively in my gut that that's what I need to do. And when I'm committed, like I'm all in, like I'll do it, or it's like do or die for me. And that, generally after a few years, I just find that feeling comes back, and I'll see something like the Bob Graham was an obvious thing. So while I'm up here, everyone does it. I supported two friends last weekend on it. It's a massive achievement. I attempted it solo, which wasn't a good idea. Um, and then the Lakes Mears Waters, again, I read about it in a book, and that felt like a good 100 miler. But I like to every few years do something really, really big. Um, the 446, interestingly, I looked at my goal plan because every year I write down big plans and lists around my goals and the future things. And I'd written down in 2021, I think it was, that one day I wanted to climb every mountain in the UK in one push. Now, obviously, when you take into fact Scotland has 2,755 mountains over 600 meters, I excluded Scotland from the list because I might not be there now. I'll leave that for the pros. But so I'd already had the idea, but life could get in the way, COVID, injuries, work, all this stuff going on, um, and also long COVID that knocked me out for about a year. Um, so this year the timing was right, and I didn't really know what it would look like, but I read about it originally through James Forrest, who did it in 6 months, and James is a friend. He's a really big hiker, a runner as well now, and that was where the inspiration came from. But I think we all have these ideas and we have these goals, but we don't commit, and that's the difference between it actually happening. Um, so I just had this vision, and when I have a vision, I just trust it. I follow it until it's done.
So how much did you plot out the route? Did you take James's route and use that? Did you sit down and draw a line on a map, or was it a little bit more work it out as you go? What did that planning stage look like? And even the physical preparation. Like you'd obviously done something somewhat similar, really, with the 100 UK county tops, which took longer than this
Yeah.
did. So you've got an experience of like being on your feet and on the bike, every day for a couple of months. That's like not a completely foreign feeling to you. But yeah, what did you learn from that you carried over into your physical prep and all the logistics that must have gone into something like this? Because I can't imagine it was straightforward.
No, I mean, getting to the start line in anything, I think, is always the hardest part. And climbing the UK with the county tops was in 2017. So really, it was quite a long time. That kind of muscle memory kind of, I didn't know if it was still there. And also, the biggest difference with that is there was a lot more cycling, a lot less running.
Okay.
So much more physical impacts, much more injury risk, and you know, the terrain, everything was different. What was different back then, and what I majorly learned from that and the Three Peaks run about 5 years ago, was that I needed to have a proper crew. Like, I needed a motorhome. I needed to have that kind of continuity of support. Whereas on the Three Peaks, on Climbing UK, I tried to wing it and I was mostly kind of self supported. I realized for this that just wasn't an option. So I knew from the start that I had to have a team. And I'm not very good at that. I'm very much used to just doing it myself, but I knew I had to have a team. Um, where did we start? I mean, I sort of had the idea for a while, and I knew I needed something, and I couldn't quite decide whether I should do it or not, because we all find lots of reasons and fears and doubts and things in the way. Um, but I didn't really properly commit until January, and before that, I'd started to like build the foundation. So the hardest part was actually to define all the mountains, because since James did it in 2017, they've declassified some of the mountains. So some of them are technically not high enough, so they've been pulled off the list. Some have been added on the list, and I
Right.
thought, kind of, for consistency, I need to do the same peaks that James did plus any new ones. So actually, there was 447 in the end, just to make things more confusing. But by this point, I'd come up with the 446 challenge, so I couldn't change it. Um, and so getting the list of peaks was the first step. James did it in a different way, because because he's sort of driving between them. His routes weren't point to point, whereas I had the benefit of being able to obviously, just run a route, and then the bike is there on the other side for me, which obviously made it a lot quicker.
Right.
Uh, but one of our mountain leaders in the charity, Mike, and also Will, who was a fundraiser for us, he had the FKT for running all the Welsh mountains in one go a few years before. So they kindly actually shared, the route for Wales, which obviously saved us so much time. But for England, that was completely new ground. So
Hmm.
fortunately, I met a friend of mine, Dan, who is as mad as me when it comes to doing this stuff, and he became, sort of project manager. He was working on this from the start, and he fortunately took on the burden of planning the whole route in the most kind of, practical way. So I left it in his hands really, and he takes all the credit for the route and the planning and logistics, because that allowed me to focus on, on the day job and the fundraising and the training. Um, so yeah, I was pretty happy with the route, but Dan literally had to get all the peaks on a map and just somehow work out the best way. And that obviously took quite a while, as you'd imagine. But from starting in January till I started in May, it was just intense. It was intense, as these things always are.
So you did just under 3,000 kilometers of distance, not taking into account the elevation gain over the 50 days. Was it a fairly even split? Did you go into it thinking, I'm going to run X number of hours per day, or I'm going to achieve X number of tops? Or, I mean, obviously it can't really work like that because the density of them is going to differ.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did you work that out? How pre-planned was that, or how much of that was kind of go by feel and see where I get to each day?
Yeah, I mean, Dan had put together an expedition guide, and we worked on a plan. But as you often find with these things, it's like on a race. The plan often falls apart when you're actually doing the thing. More so on like on a consecutive challenge than it would on a 3 hour race, because it's very important to stay to the plan. Um, but I think we had guidelines, and I kind of said, oh, I'm roughly going to start, at 7 every day. I'm going to run for 10 hours, etc. I'm going to do this X, Y, Z. But the more tired you get, the harder it is to be consistent. And also the days were so variable. The conditions, the drives from, the campsite back to where I started or finished. When I started falling behind, suddenly you got bigger days to try and catch up on schedule.
Yeah.
The density in the Lake District, the peaks were so close, whereas in Wales there was lots of big gaps. In the Cheviot, they're all fairly spread out. In the Pennines, no one goes there. So some of the routes were just so slow because there was nothing on the ground, and also if I had sponsors joining me or people joining me, sometimes that could slow things down. So any kind of consistency really quickly went away. But on average, I'd say I was doing 10 or 12-hour days of running or cycling. Um, the tops, I think there were some days I did over like 20 mountains, because, I had a very long day, or because they were very kind of close together. Might be one day where I have to do, 10 miles just to hit one. Um, you know, and so that variety, I think, it helped mentally, because every day was different. And also there were easy days in between the long days, which allowed me to not fall apart too quickly. Um, but the whole thing was just an adventure. That's the only way I can describe it. I mean, day one was 2 mountains in Dartmoor, then I had 100 miles on the bike to Bristol, then I had 100
That
miles.
yeah, that was gonna be my question, like, what were the longest sort of cycle legs to get from
Yeah,
an isolated peak to the next one? 100 miles.
yeah. Day one and day two were about 102 miles each.
Wow.
I had about 100 miles from North Wales to the Peak District, although I fell short because my bike broke, so didn't quite make it. And then I had about 90 miles from Northumberland back in Cumbria, in the Lake District, and that was in a heat wave as well, just to make it more challenging. My longest run was 38.9 miles, which was the day before I finished. Um,
Wow.
but there were some days when I was only doing like 13, 14 miles, and like in my head, I saw that on the schedule, and I said to Dan beforehand, I said, "This is going to be too easy. I can do that. That's too short. Everyone's going to think I'm being soft."
Oh,
And
no.
at the end of it, I said to Dan, I said, "I am so glad we stuck to the schedule because in that last week, things went wrong. You know, I couldn't find a guide on Pillar Rock. I got injured. There was a thunderstorm. The final day was so long because we had to cram everything into it to make sure I finished on schedule. There was very, very little stretch. So actually, what I learned is that it's very easy to think it's too easy when you're sat staring at a spreadsheet, but when you're out there for 45 days, it's very, very different.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, we've all done it looking at splits in like you say, a 3, 4 hour race, or you're going out and doing a 50K on trail and maybe targeting to run 6 hours, and you're looking at the pace you need to run the last 5K and thinking like, "Oh, that's like jogging pace," and then you're there in the moment feeling like you're in an all out sprint and you're not even hitting pace. So, I mean, I can't even imagine extrapolate that over a month and a half. But so what was the first kind of physical limitation that you encountered? Like, what was the first day or the first issue where you were kind of thinking, okay, this is going to have a significant impact? Because I can only imagine like muscular fatigue and DOMS and cramp and whatever. Or does that just stuff just melt away after a week and your body just realizes, look, this is what we're doing?
Yeah, I think I was very lucky I didn't get a single blister, not one,
Wow.
which quite proud of. Cramp, again, I'm one of those kind of rare runners who never has cramp. Um, touch wood, because there's a lot of
Nice.
there's like,
Yeah.
but physically, I think ankles are my weak point. I'm always rolling them. I think coming from that kind of background on road, that's my excuse anyway. But on day three in the Brecon Beacons, I rolled my ankle, and I thought, oh, here we go. Um, and it was quite sore for a couple of days. But what I learned from I think from the free peaks in particular is how the body is very good at adapting, and it kind of gets to the point if you're able to work through and manage all the niggles for long enough, the body kind of accepts its fate and it kind of says, okay, this is what we have to do. And there's obviously there's obviously times like having a seizure last year when obviously that's very, very different. But most of the time, when it's niggles and pulls and things, the body will work through them. And when the ankle went, that was okay. And the next day I just strapped it. I did everything I could to try, just to try and manage it. I'd worked a lot of that in my prep to try not to minimize that risk as well, which helped a lot. Um, the major physical issue was quite early on in mid Wales when I pulled my hamstring. And I was coming down a really steep bank. I'd done about 32 miles that day around Arran Ford, where it was really bad terrain, really wet and windy and horrible. And I was coming down, coming down a hillside where there's like tall grass, so you can't run. You just sort of hop and bound. And I felt this twinge in my hamstring. I've never had issues there before. So I thought this is interesting. I ran back, I didn't really feel it. And the next day it was like just trying to move my leg was making me sick, the pain. I thought, okay, this is a problem because I kind of need my hamstring to go up and down hills. Um, so I took an early rest day. We got a bath in a hotel. We did everything we could to manage it. And the next day, I put a knee brace on and I worked through it. But when that happened at first, I thought, how is this going to be possible? In your head, it doesn't make sense. Um, then it happened again about a week later on my other leg. And I remember
Right.
being in the Carneddau, and I started out that morning being able to move okay. The day before, we did about another 32 mile over about 4,000 meters of ascent, so it was a big day out. And in the Carneddau, I remember just starting out feeling okay, and then the pain got worse and worse through the day to the point that I couldn't even walk without pain. And so I was kind of shuffling. I really like nice long slope that normally, like, I love that because I can actually move faster. I couldn't, it was kind of a hobble down. So 2 miles took a lifetime. And again, you think, how on earth am I going to run another, 300 mountains at this point? Um, but I think you just have to trust the process and trust your body and be as proactive as you can. And there are times when it's different. But when that happened, I thought, yeah, it's game over. I really did. I got a sports massage, and he said to me that there was no damage there. He couldn't feel a tear or anything, which is my biggest worry. And that's where I think so much of this is psychological, you
Yeah.
know. So that was the main thing. And then after that, I had so many slips and falls. I mean, coming down Ling Mel, I slipped, I hit my back, and I had like pain going up into my arm and my neck and my shoulders. And I thought, okay, this is not good. Um, Coming down Great Gable, I kind of went down a ski slope. A big boulder kind of started to slide alongside me. My foot got wedged into a rock, and I literally had to pull my foot out just to get it clear. The rock went straight through my shoe into my toe. I mean, I still got 24 miles that day to run, so I just had to ignore it, Um, but touch wood, to be honest, given my standards, I got through fairly unscathed.
I mean, that doesn't sound, that's a lot of stuff, but considering the number of days that you're running for and the number of mountains that you're summiting, it's funny that one of those you mentioned is Great Gable because that was the second peak on the 50K Summit Series Run Through Trail event that we put on this year in the lakes. It's the first time doing an event there, and a
Wow.
lot of the feedback was, yeah, relating to the technicality and challenging Lake District esque terrain up on Great Gable, and the looseness and steepness, and I mean it's super technical, right? Um,
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it, to be honest. I mean, I did come down the wrong way. I think I was trying to take a shortcut down the Bog Graham line, rather than the path. But it's the thing, like, although I do events, and ironically, I say all this, and I've just entered 3 trail races yesterday.
that's that looking for a new goal thing.
Yeah, but for me, I see them as intermediate steps towards the next kind of like the big goal, which is in September. But like, I don't enter actually fell races because I just do not enjoy running fast down that terrain because I know I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah, yeah.
But I know people who do, and I'm in awe of them.
Yeah. No, I mean that's it's a whole it's a different sport. Like the descending skills of some of the kind of top level fell runners is yeah is another thing. But I've got to ask now, seeing as you, I mean, I can't imagine there's too many people that have seen the summit of every mountain in England and Wales. So you're in a kind of like quite a small group, a privileged position to be able to answer a few questions. So, um, most picturesque summit in England and Wales, which one just comes to mind immediately? I know these would be difficult to answer, but one's got to spring to mind.
Oh god, I mean, it all depends on the weather and so many things.
For you on your trip specifically, which one
Okay,
stands out?
I really liked. It's quite strange, but actually, cold fell in the Pennines. Like the Pennines in general was pretty bleak, but just getting a sunset across the coast, like a 360 across to the lakes to the Cheviots over the coast, running down into the sunset was magical.
Nice. How about um favorite area? If you were going to go back and take a friend out and do 30K in the hills, running on trails, enjoyable, fun, beautiful, nice scenery, where's the first place that you go into?
Definitely the Yorkshire Dales. I loved it around there. Really
Really?
nice and friendly and runnable. Yeah, and great cycling as well.
Awesome. And then what about kind of biggest surprise? Where was somewhere that you hadn't ever been to or hadn't ever necessarily heard of that turned out to be pretty spectacular?
I'd say the Mulwins in Wales. Pretty industrial area, but some of the peaks around there and the views were phenomenal. Like great running, and again, no one else there. Yeah, all the Mulwin range was pretty impressive.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, well, we've got to ask the question because I mean, it's tricky, right? I was thinking as we were chatting that I wasn't going to do this kind of last question of what's the next goal based on everything that we've said. But you did just allude to something coming up in September, so you got to tell us a little bit about kind of what's next on the slate. What are you planning for September?
Yeah. Well, I think before that, just to kind of set the seed, I think in this time post challenge, enjoying the journey. Yes, although I have entered more races and I'm looking forward to those. And I actually did the place fell 15K race about a week ago. It was a very last minute decision. I never normally enter races unless I'm like 100% onto them, but it was literally, it was next door. I entered it for some fun. No expectations on myself. Um, and I did okay in that, but, at the moment, I've just been kind of running to do exactly how I feel like, so I'm not really, sort of stressing too much about my pace. I'm just running for the sake of running, and I think we all need to do that sometimes, just to run as far as we want and go to new places. So that's how I've kind of dealt with the last kind of 4 weeks. And physically, I've actually recovered pretty well. My knee's hurting me now, which is typical because it didn't hurt at all on the challenge. Um, and as always, it's the mental bit. So part of that is just being patient. And as you say, doing all the things I wasn't able to do for 6 months because I was focused. But what's next? I've got the Seven Valleys Ultra in September, which is
Nice.
110K. I've done that race twice before. It went pretty well the first year. Last year, didn't have a great race, but it's a cracking event. Brilliant route in the Lake District. So I'm hoping I can get some speed back because my legs are pretty strong at plodding because I wasn't moving fast on the 446, but I've not really I've not really maintained my speed, unfortunately. So I need to get a bit of that. I need to get some work done there. Um, I've got that, and then the coast to coast. I attempted twice last year. It didn't go that well, which is the Northern Traverse race in April. So
Okay.
I had to pull out of that last year because of COVID again. I tried to run the distance, on my own in July, and only got as far as 124 miles on my second go. So I thought I'll go back and finish that properly. But in terms of what's next, I really feel like I've not hit my potential in running that far, and I can't, emotionally or physically or financially do something as big as a 446 again. So I just want to enjoy running for myself again, and set a few events. So we'll see how that one goes. But yeah, I maybe stay, I might just stay off the hills for a while.
I mean, it's a nice way to do it, and it fits based on what you were saying before. Is that like these types of challenges? Again, it's saying it as if it's a thing that people do. It's kind of not really. Like there's a small handful of people like yourself who take on these huge challenges, and it might seem to the listeners or to me or whatever, to people who don't necessarily do things quite this extreme, that it's fairly commonplace because you see things on YouTube, you see things on Instagram. There's all sorts of people doing crazy ultra long challenges, especially around trail running, and doing all these different links and records and challenges. But really, it's a tiny niche, small group of people who are actually willing to take on that type of challenge. And it kind of sounds like it takes a long time off the back of that to mentally recover and build up the desire to take on something like that again. I guess it scratches the itch and it stays scratched for a while, until,
Yeah.
3, 4 years time when you're looking for something else. But it's interesting to hear you say you've got 100K in the lakes and you need to get your speed back. Which I suppose relative to what you have been doing makes a lot of sense. But I suppose you could almost look at the 446 as being like the ultimate base building block. So now you've got this like amazing stamina aerobic base, and now you can kind of build on top of that. So, what will the training for that look like for you? Obviously, you said you're based in Kendall. You've got a
Yeah.
few races in the calendar to sharpen up a bit and kind of get a bit of speed back. But are you coached? Do you do your own training plans? I know not right now. You've just said you don't have much structure, but when you get into a proper block for these races, how do you attack that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been coached by Sophie Mullins now for about 3 years, but then I had actually long COVID, so I wasn't really being trained for a year because I couldn't actually run much. Um, and so yeah, I am on a plan, and I think post challenge, I just said to her, I said, I just want to do what I feel like. So don't try and kind of I mean, obviously as a coach, you want the athlete to keep moving and keep doing things rather than stop completely. I think stopping completely probably wouldn't have been good for me. So, because I don't drive, I was cycling a lot and doing things, but I didn't have any kind of structure. But Sophie has kind of got me back to things now. This week will probably be like a normal week for me in terms of mileage. In terms of um, in terms of the next race, I mean, there is still like an underlying fatigue there, and I'm finding that when I'm doing intensity or like long runs, I'm feeling pretty wiped afterwards. I'm not
Yeah.
sleeping well, so I don't want to push myself too soon because it has only been 4 weeks, and 45 days without a day off. It hasn't improved my speed, unfortunately, because on the place fell race, I definitely couldn't handle anything heart rate. It just didn't feel good, but it was only 3 weeks. Um,
But
Before the
like you say, your
446.
body's adapted though, hasn't it? Like
Yeah.
you've not exactly been doing VO2 max work. Like a fell race is going to
No.
feel horrific after all you've done is kind of hike and
Yeah.
jog and plod. So
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, at the moment, it's kind of a mix of kind of high, fairly high mileage in the hills, but then like 1 or 2 speed sessions a week. And, you know, um, the speed sessions are kind of fairly short bursts because, doing lots of kind of like, sort of, you know, because, because of, I mean, I've got a half marathon in September. I've got a 10K trail race in a week beforehand. Literally, those are going to be seen as, I guess, like a long speed session. But all my speed work is more sort of aimed, for the ultra distance, and just the stamina to be able to run at a good pace for 60 odd miles with 11,000 foot of climbing. My legs are really strong, which is the hard part when you're running that distance. But I just need to be able to switch out of sort of plodding place. So a bit of work at threshold, but generally just getting my mileage back up, which for me, the sweet spot's around 60 miles a week. If
Okay.
I do more than that, I tend to fall apart. And on the 446, to be honest, I wasn't doing massively high miles. The main focus was just to get my legs as strong as possible. So I was doing strength work 2, 3 days a week. My long runs, I was just trying to get as much ascent as possible. So, 8 or 9,000 feet per long run, up to sort of 10 or 11,000 feet sometimes, just
Wow.
to, I guess, kind of, just to kind of simulate my legs being tired. And some days, I was cycling to a peak. I was doing a hill run up Hell Valley and cycling back, trying to get my legs used to the kind of, some moving between sports as well, which is quite specific. Um, but it was mostly just running up and down hill reps. As much of that as I could, and for this race, I don't have a massive build time. I've got about 8 weeks, and with a taper and a recovery from this, I'm not going to have lots of long runs or speed sessions. But I did 16 miles on Saturday, and I felt pretty good. And there is a lot of speed on the descent. What was really surprising is I got really bad DOMs on the Monday. I was like, you think now, and my legs would be obviously like super strong and bulletproof.
Yeah, but you're running
Actually,
faster though, right? Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Running at pace downhill, it's well, like you've just said, it's shocking the impact that has, like the amount of force to your
yeah.
quads.
Yeah, and so I assumed that I'd have, that kind of sense of, conditioning and protection. But Sophie said that actually, like, that wears off quite fast. And on the 446, like, it wouldn't have been achievable or sustainable had I been running that hard all the time. Um, so yeah, I'm enjoying that feeling again at the moment, and just generally just trying to build up a consistency.
Nice, awesome. Well, yeah, variety, spice of life. It makes perfect sense, and it is so interesting at how your body can adapt to these crazy challenges, and then how coming back into something that's a bit more kind of normal for what you'd usually do and regular mileage and running a little bit quicker downhill, then the body actually reacts quite poorly to it. And yeah, no, it's I mean, never ending puzzle to solve, but that's what kind of keeps it interesting and like you say, makes that the whole process side of things engaging. But I mean, obviously, best of luck with all the training for the race coming up, and huge congratulations for what you've just achieved. Because, like you say, it hasn't settled in yet. 4 weeks kind of sounds like quite a long time, but it's still not been as long as the actual challenge took for you to complete. And I know you said you didn't hit the fundraising goal. So anyone that's listening, obviously, if you've resonated with Alex's story, and you value the idea of helping people get out into the outdoors for their mental well-being and for their health, and this is something that you benefit from and you're able to kind of contribute to that, there'll definitely be links in the description and everything of the YouTube video and Spotify. Obviously follow along with Alex's journey, and see how that progresses through all of his channels, which we'll also share, and hopefully, yeah, you've gained a bit of inspiration from this. Not that everyone should go out and do a 52-day 3,000-kilometer challenge, as Alex has said, but just to go out, set a goal, push yourself, and just enjoy the process.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and I hope they've all, yeah, I hope everyone's enjoyed the journey. But the hardest part is always that first step. But it's interesting and exciting to see where that can take you.
Absolutely. Awesome. Let's end it there then, Alex. Well, lovely to chat. Thanks so much for your time. And yeah, huge congrats because it is massively inspiring and super impressive. So well done for everything.
Cheers, thank you.
Awesome. All right, then, everyone. So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time with the next episode. Hopefully, you've really enjoyed this chat. As always, go to Instagram, follow us at RunThrough Trails, and check out Alex's profiles. And if you can, donate to the cause and follow on his journey. All right. Cheers. See you next time.